Hello viewers of the internet and welcome to this video where I will be attempting to explain what you can do or what you can't do with a £24 Windows XP machine which I bought off eBay as it is. And anyway, first things first, it is not powerful. It has a 2.8 GHz Celeron, although it doesn't behave at all like a 2.8 GHz CPU, or like you would expect a 2.8 GHz CPU. It behaves more like a 1.4. Speaking of which, it was actually beaten on pass mark by an AMD 1.4 GHz CPU, yeah. For the day, Intel was weak, Celeron was weaker, and then there's the Pentiums, which take the same socket, take the same slot of where the Celerons go, I believe, but then they are a lot better. But even still, even having said that, below the AMDs of the era, it's also a single core and it has next to no cache, as you would expect from a Celeron. So, having got that over with, how does it actually perform? Well, in overall Windows applications, it's not too bad. It deals okay with basic opening files, basic office work. It's good for that kind of thing where you don't need a huge amount of power. It also runs 2D games okay. They are very basic and very light games. Snood, for example, I had working perfectly. Not sure of the frame rate or anything, but hey, it was working. It was definitely playable. And there's not much to complain about there, but I did try Angry Birds, something that should be simple, something that should be light, and it just didn't work. It was a lag fest, quite frankly. Not the kind of thing you would want to play. So, having said that, buy a Pentium? Maybe. With a Pentium, I imagine it would be a lot better. I imagine it would be nowhere near as badly slow as it is. The RAM is pretty good. 2 GB of RAM. It enables me to open all the things I should need to open. Any more on a socket 478 board, to be honest, is pretty useless. I don't see why you would ever need more than 2 GB of RAM. The integrated graphics are what I'm stuck with, and they only output VGA, so you can't use sound through your monitor. However, it does have a built-in speaker, which gives it some revival, although it's only half a watt. At least that's what it said on the speaker itself, so it's a very, very, very weak speaker. It sounds pretty good actually, unless you go on VLC Media Player and crank it up to 125%, which you kind of need to do to hear it anyway, and then it just doesn't sound great. But you probably won't be using that speaker, let's be honest. You can buy a decent set of desktop speakers for £5 to £10 if you want to, less used, so why you would bother using a single internal speaker when it's that quiet is just beyond me. It's a shame really, because it had such potential. And I did even have a Lenovo PC with a built-in speaker, which I was happy to use because it was actually half a decent speaker and it got loud enough for me to happily, comfortably use it. You know, I have low expectations, but the speaker's just too quiet, honestly. Now, what else? I can just say it's too slow. It's tried on Linux. I actually tried Android. Now, I did have Android on an old netbook, which it should have worked similarly on the Celeron because both are extremely, extremely weak CPUs, not particularly strong at any one thing. But then it didn't run. I don't know particularly why, but it's something to do with the Pentium 4 era 478 chipset. Something Intel did with that really messes with it. And I think a few other Linux distributions as well, which just refused to run. Ubuntu based ones seem to be fine though. I managed to run MX OS and Ubuntu and install it to my 10 GB test drive. Speaking of which, I have an 80 GB drive, which it also came with one of these. This is not a bad drive, it just seems to have failed on me. So that stuff you have to be aware of on an old computer. It can happen. Nothing lasts forever, as I say, and that really is the case here. So the 10 GB drive I was using, a 17-year-old drive, mind, it did get things working, but having said that, it's not ideal. It runs out of space quite quickly, because I didn't want to uninstall XP though, so basically it was stick whatever old IDE drives I have in there and see how they run. Now, speaking of which, IDE hard drives, those ones in particular are not quick. Maybe I could set up both drives. It does actually have the wiring to just plug another drive right in there and use it, as long as you have the jumper, which is something to do with this. There we go. This has a jumper on it. I'll be sure to take that off if I chuck the drive out, because they're quite useful. And it basically tells it what it is. It's a master, it's a slave, whatever, because on IDE drives, I think there's a diagram here actually, which will probably explain it as well as I can. It tells you on one position it's a master, on one position it's a slave, on one, I don't know. I guess it's auto detect or something. And that's where it will decide. I'm not sure what I'm doing with my hand, but that's where it will decide what to do it with. And all the wiring was there to just stick another drive in and use it. So I guess if you could get it set up correctly in the BIOS and everything, you could just run a second drive and install all your software on it, which should make it quicker, which you would need to do, because the thing 100% on CPU far too much of the time. As I discussed, even a fairly basic game like Angry Birds is not nice to the computer. The CPU is 100% so much of the time, and that means loading things up. You don't really have an option for an SSD either, because it's an IDE. It's harder to find that kind of SSD. So as I say, your best option is just chaining another drive in there and hoping it's not saddled down with all the Windows XP stuff, and you can load things quicker because of that. Now, speaking of which, browsing performance as well. CPU performance is 100%ing on various operating systems. When I was trying to use Opera, which is probably the most modern and secure operating system you can get under Windows XP. And that is disappointing. If I can't run Opera, what am I to do? Well, I had to run Kmelon, which appears to be unsupported now. It was actually a very good light browser. For what I was using it for, nothing really went particularly wrong. It was slow, as I would expect, but, quick enough, I feel, once I'd loaded up to just do some basic web browsing on it. Problem is, it's a 2+ year old piece of software and the project looks dead, so it's not like they're going to be releasing anything else for Windows XP particularly, because Firefox, of which it's based on, around 2015, I think, stopped supporting XP. Maybe even this year it stopped supporting XP, but XP is no longer supported. That's the fact of the matter now. And as I say, Opera, it's worked fine on more modern Core 2 Duo machines, but I don't know, on the on the 6-core Xeon it works. Yeah, obviously it'll work on that, but it doesn't work so well on a Celeron. Now, what I'll probably do to it is, because there's so many cheap Pentiums around for around £2 to £3 shipped, I'll probably get one of those and try and put it in, because for that kind of money, I'm not throwing loads away, even if I do mess it up, and even if I do ruin the entire machine. As I just admitted, I've got a 6-core Xeon, so I probably won't be desperate by this stage. Okay, so that was a minor intermission with the camera being funny, but as I was saying, I have a 6-core, and given the speed of a 6-core, the speed of a dual core, which I have also used, and the speed of a Celeron, I would not recommend it for daily use. And believe it or not, since I've not got an SSD in there yet, I am still on a standard 7200 RPM hard drive. A good 7200 RPM, but still a 7200 RPM drive. Now, it needs more CPU, I can just feel it. More graphics as well, they would always help. Unfortunately, getting a good AGP GPU for a good price always seems to be the problem. If you want an actually good AGP one, they cost pretty good amounts of money. Like, more than you would pay for a used G210, and for more performance, but not by that much more performance in a lot of cases. So, that's a disappointment, I have to say, honestly. But the Pentium 4 upgrade can be done easily, and the things are extremely cheap because no one wants them, so I'm probably going to try that, as I said. And that's all I've really got to try, because I've tried just about everything else. I think I mentioned I tried installing Android, but it gave me some error, and I couldn't get past it. Not with my knowledge, because I just don't understand. It was hard enough to get it installed, to be honest, to find out what was causing that problem. And then when I did, I actually installed it, but it just wouldn't boot, even though it was on the hard drive, and it wouldn't boot in live mode either. So although I suspect Android could have saved the Celeron, there's just nothing I can do with Android to save the Celeron. So I'm going to have to use power to chuck the Celeron away, I guess. It would have been nice to keep it, but it's just too underpowered to do anything with. I mean, I've used a 500 megahertz Pentium 3, and if I'm entirely honest, it doesn't feel much better than that. The motherboard and everything is a lot better in that it supports a lot newer stuff, but it's just, for performance, the Pentium 3 really isn't that bad. Even though it was 500 megahertz with far, far less RAM, the thing just chugged along, and it didn't give up. I mean, it was willing to try and punch above its weight. But anyway, with, I guess, a disappointing Pentium 3, but an even more disappointing Celeron, if that's even possible, yeah, or Intel Celery. I'm so disappointed, I'm just going to name it Celery. Anyway, goodbye, until another day.